Hello everybody, Realm Builder Guy here, and welcome back to the channel and a Victoria 3 Dev Diary update where I'm going to go back, because obviously I was gone for a couple of weeks, and review some of the Dev Diaries that I have missed, specifically on buildings and goods. And I wanted to get this out before the next Dev Diary comes out and kind of get myself caught up and you caught up. I'm sure many of you have seen a bunch of other videos and read the Dev Diaries. So maybe this is just redundant and not that interesting, but I'm still going to go through it and give my thoughts on it. Please let me know down in the comments what you think about both buildings and goods. And don't forget to hit that like button, as it really helps the channel. And speaking of helping the channel, here's a quick shout out to newest top tier level Patreon supporter, Bramja. I apologize if I am mispronouncing your name. If you want to find out how you can support the channel on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. So now let's get into buildings. So this was the Dev Diary number 3 that came out on June 10th. Hello again, everyone. It's Thursday again, and that means that it's time to talk about buildings. Buildings are a core mechanic of Victoria 3, as it is where the pops work to produce resources such as goods. Buildings represent a wide range of industries, businesses, and government functions, from humble subsistence farms to complex motor industries and sprawling financial districts. In this Dev Diary, we're going to broadly cover the main types of buildings and their function in Victoria 3. To talk about buildings, though, I first have to mention states. So, states are a concept that should be generally familiar to anyone who's played some of our other games such as Victoria 2 and Hearts of Iron 4, a geographic unit of varying size in which much of Victoria 3's gameplay takes place. States are where pops live and, more importantly for our subject matter, where buildings are located and built. So the state of, I always mispronounce this, but I'm going to say it, Götaland in Sweden. So we got Swedish market. Obviously it's part of Sweden. Overview, buildings, information. You can see infrastructure usage. So they're using 14 of potential 60 infrastructure. Market access 100%, you're part of Sweden. The GDP, the taxation, and the expenses. Here you can see the building slots. The standard of living 9.2, 192,000 peasants, 2 unemployed pops in here, and the population growth. And here you can kind of see where everybody is. So it looks like they are struggling, they are middling, and they are secure. We will return to states more in later Dev Diaries. But for now, let's keep talking about buildings. Before we start on buildings, something that's important to note is that buildings are just places where pops can work and generally do not represent a single building. A single level of government administration, for example, represents the necessary buildings and infrastructure to support a certain number of bureaucrats. Buildings always need qualified pops to work in them to yield any benefit, and an empty building is just that, empty and completely useless. This holds true even for buildings like railroads and ports that did not need pops to work in them in Victoria 2. So again, this is important. A building is not like, there's only one, sawmill in Bavaria, in Nuremberg or Franken or anywhere like that. In an individual state, it represents a slew of buildings that represent that type of industry where people work. Most buildings are directly constructed, but some, like the subsistence buildings below, will appear, will appear automatically based on certain conditions. When buildings are constructed, the construction uses pop labor and goods, and the costs involved will be subject to market forces. But on to the different building types. First out, we have subsistence buildings. These are special type of highly inefficient buildings that cannot, highly inefficient, so we're talking about government buildings? That cannot manually be built or destroyed, but rather will appear anywhere in the world where there is arable land that isn't being used for another type of building. The vast majority of the world's population starts the game working in subsistence buildings as peasants, and much of the game's industrialization process is about finding more productive employment for your peasants. Peasants eke out a meager living in these subsistence farms, contributing little to GDP and taxes per capita. Here we can see subsistence farms, so yearly productivity, Employment, so 202 of 260K, potential employment here, average annual wage, and weekly taxes. So it basically, this just talks about everything that's above. Graphically, I really like how this is represented. In general, I think Victoria 3 is a very eye-pleasing game so far from what we've seen. Another special type of building is urban centers. Like subsistence buildings, these are automatically created rather than built, with the level of urban center in a state being tied to the amount of urbanization generated by its other buildings. Urban centers primarily employ shopkeepers and provide a number of important local functions that we will get into at a later point. The urban center is where you'll find most of your middle-class shopkeepers. So here you can see urban center. I mean, it looks just like a town square with a statue in it. Okay. So let's see. Urban center will automatically appear where there's urbanization in the state. One level of urban center is created for each 100 urbanization in the state. And production methods listed down here. Cash reserves, the employment, productivity, etc. So you can see the average annual wage and the weekly taxes. This one produces more weekly taxes because there's just more of them. It's 26. This is 2. It's 2. So, if we break that down to 1, so that's 250, 270-ish. If we divide this by 26, which is math I'm not going to try right now, you can see urban centers definitely produce more in weekly taxes. Next up, we have the government buildings. These are buildings that are fully funded by the state, i.e. you, and provide crucial civil services required for the smooth running of a Victorian nation. Examples include government administrations, where bureaucrats produce bureaucracy for the administration of incorporated states, and funding of institutions and universities, where academics produce innovation for technological progression. Bureaucrats work in government administrations to provide bureaucracy, the lifeblood of the government. Okay, so here you've got the governmental building, production methods, process, weekly bureaucracy, expenses, government expenses, weekly taxes. Divide that by 4, so that's less than 250. That means a, urban center produces more in weekly taxes revenue than the government, which makes sense because government costs tax revenue. Don't even get me started on that. The counterpart to government buildings is private industries. The vast majority of buildings in Victoria 3 fall under this category, which includes a broad range of industries such as non-subsistence farms, plantations, mines, and factories. Unlike government buildings, private industries are not owned by the state, but rather by pops such as capitalists and aristocrats, who reap the profits they bring in and pay wages to the other pops working there, usually at least. Under certain economic systems, the ownership of buildings may be radically different. Many of these buildings are limited by locally available resources such as arable land for agriculture and simply how much iron is available in the state for iron mines. Urban buildings such as factories, however, are only limited by how many people you can cram into the state, simulating the more densely populated nature of cities. In short, there is no system of building slots or anything like that, as we want limitations on buildings to function in a sensible and realistic way. Very interesting. Several different types of private industries are shown below. So we've got urban center, urban buildings, you've got resource buildings, and ag buildings here. Finally, there are development buildings. These are often, but not always, government buildings that distinguish themselves by providing vital state-level functions. A couple of examples are barracks that recruit and train soldiers from the local population, and railways that provide the infrastructure other buildings need to bring their goods to the market. From left to right, we've got barracks, port, grayed out, we have naval base, and railway. So very, very important. Obviously, there's a difference between a naval base and a port being for trade, naval base being for military. To finish up this dev diary, I just want to mention that building up your country is meant to be more of a hands-on experience in Victoria 3, as this is absolutely core to the society building aspect of the game and forms a major part of the game's core loop. So here, this is hands-on buildings approach. If you think of Imperator, Rome, or even Stellaris, it's a very hands-on experience because that's how you develop your society or your empire or whatever. This naturally also means that we need to give the player the necessary tools to manage their buildings in a large empire, which will likely involve some form of autonomous building construction. Though we haven't yet nailed down exactly what form that will take, and whether it will involve more direct decision-making on the part of the investor class. Now remember, in Victoria 2, in a lot of government or parliamentarian forms, capitalists were the ones that automated the building of factories, for example, or railways or anything like that. So the construction, you didn't have the direct involvement that you clicked on a button and built something. It was through policies, it was through attracting, the right type of people into a certain area and things like that. So it looks like they haven't quite nailed down how they want to do it. So this, again, makes me believe that we're probably about a year away from this game coming out. Year-ish. Ultimately, though, we want the player, not the AI, to be the one primarily in charge of the development of their own country. I like this, but I think in Victoria 2, you as a player were involved because you could set the conditions for people to build the buildings or infrastructure that you need. A lot of times that's, different forms of government. Some governments are directly involved in constructing infrastructure, whereas other ones, or buildings, or the economic mechanisms, whereas other forms of government try to create a condition for people to create that. So I think you can kind of bridge the gap and do both here. Well, there you have it. There is, of course, a lot in here, such as production methods, that will receive further explanation in many more dev diaries we have planned. Be sure to tune in next week as I talk about goods, or as I call it, not next week, but rather right now. All right, dev diary number 4 is on the cards for goods. This came out on June 17th, so last week. Happy Thursday and welcome back to yet another Victoria 3 Dev Diary, this time on the subject of goods. Goods are a core economic feature of Victoria 3, just as they were in previous Victoria games and come in a wide variety of types. Also, as in previous Victoria games, the manufacturing of goods is how the vast majority of wealth in Victoria 3 is created. Fundamentally, a unit of goods represent a quantity of a certain type of natural resource, manufactured good, or intangible service, and come attached with a price tag. This price varies both in base. A single unit of tanks is pricier than a single unit of fabric, and in actual market value as the prices of goods change depending on supply and demand. Here we see a selection of goods that are bought and sold in the British market. You can see lumber, fish, a bell, coal. Got meat, that looks like maybe cloth, clothing here, fruit, vegetables, tools, basic food. It looks like milk, bread, and cheese. There are 4 broad categories of goods: staple goods, luxury goods, industrial goods, and military goods. Of these, staple luxury goods are mainly consumed by pops, and industrial military goods are mainly consumed by buildings. But there are no hard rules here. You will find buildings using luxury goods and pops purchasing industrial goods when and where it makes sense for them to do so. That makes sense. Staple goods are everyday goods that pops need to live, such as food to eat, wood to heat their homes, and clothes to wear. Staple goods tend to be purchased in vast quantities by poor and middle-class pops, the richer pops generally eschewing them for luxury variants. Grain, possibly the most staple of all staple goods. So here we can see British, slightly cheaper price, again going up, down. Show potentials on map, show production on map, show consumption on map. That's really nice. So you can see where it could be grown, produced, and where consumption of this good is. And here you can see the market trend. This is, your typical, it just started, so everything kind of goes down. The game starts, and then it becomes a real market price. I remember Victoria 2 had that also a lot, where like the first month, the first few weeks in game, prices were a little unstable, and then it all kind of stabilized. Sold by, building production, British market, bought by, pop consumption, and building consumption. So you can see pop consumption is the main here, but there is some building consumption for it. Luxury goods are things that pops do not necessarily need, but definitely want, such as fine foods, luxury drinks like tea and coffee, or fine clothes made from Chinese silk. Luxuries tend to be more profitable to produce than staple goods, but depend on having a customer base with money. A poor factory worker isn't going to buy a whole lot of mahogany cabinets. We can never have too many Ming vases, I always say. So we got porcelain here, can be produced by, so this is the building that can produce it. Production methods, so Glassworks ceramics, Glassworks bone china, consumed by pops of wealth levels 15 to 99 as part of the luxury items and needs category. So we've got wealth levels we're dealing with here. Industrial goods are goods such as iron, coal, rubber, and lead, whose main purpose is often to be converted into another, more profitable good. Securing a steady supply of vital industrial goods is crucial to industrialization and growing the GDP of your country. Tools are essential to the operation of many industries. So these are the tools. So again, you can see it's basically the same thing here. Building consumption is the number one. Who bought it, sold by building production. So this is a buildings good. Military goods are goods such as small arms, ammunition, and warships that are used by military buildings to arm and supply the armies and navies of the 19th century nations. The more technologically advanced the army or navy, the more complex and expensive military goods they will need. I'm told that soldiers tend to perform better if they're given ammunition for their guns. I can definitely vouch for that. So munition parts, munition plants for percussion caps, munition plants for explosive shells. Very important, percussion caps. Otherwise, you can't actually ignite anything if you don't have a percussion cap. Can be used by barracks and naval bases. All right, so we'll be returning to the topic of goods in later dev diaries when discussing related mechanics such as markets, pop needs, goods substitution, and cultural obsessions. Oppressions? Wow. Probably cultural oppression too. But for now, I bid you adieu for a while, as next week, Michael will provide you with a dev diary about something we've been teasing for some time now, production methods. All right, so that will be coming up here very, very shortly. And I am actually recording this on Wednesday, June 23rd, when I will also be putting this out. Tomorrow, June 24th, Thursday, tend to be when these Victoria 3 dev diaries come out. So another one will be coming here very, very shortly. But let me know what you think. Let me know down in the comments about goods and buildings. For me, it's all very promising. It's all very logical. It makes sense. It's a good way to kind of, through buildings, you can also control your goods. One thing I love is here that you can really see where things are being consumed, produced, and potentials in the market price. I like the UI so far, what we're seeing. Graphically very pleasing, but again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this, please don't forget to hit the like button. And until next time, I'm Realm Builder Guy, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.